So in the first session, we paused at the point of the implications of this deeper understanding of our own true spiritual nature and what the various shifts in public policy are implied. So in the meantime, while we are working on making these shifts, we have to continue to do the kind of work we have started, which is the external work, which includes things like shifts to circular economics, donut economics, technology for clean, green energy, and policies and politics of prosperity without growth, sometimes called degrowth or post-growth, and the decoupling of economic growth from quality of life. All of that is important. So we are not at all arguing to stop any of that work. It has to continue. That is to say, the external work must continue, but must now be complemented with this link to inner growth, inner development, what we are calling applied spirituality. This has even been recognized by the famous scientist Albert Einstein, when he says that the intuitive mind is a sacred gift and the rational mind is a faithful servant. And that we all know, we all have an intuitive mind and a rational mind. The problem, he argues, is that we have created a society that honors the servant, the rational mind, and have forgotten the gift, the intuitive mind. And that's what we are arguing. We need to bring it together so that the rational mind and the intuitive mind is more in tune and working more in harmony in our public policies, in our politics, and in the way we approach sustainable development policy. So the implications there are that these insights will hopefully help us make the transition from the world as we know it, the dominant linear, deterministic, reductionist, Newtonian worldview, which one might also call a world as seen through the left hemisphere, to a view of the world which is a more balanced left hemisphere, right hemisphere, in which the right hemisphere, the coordinator, the linker, the bringing together of a more holistic vision of the world is at work. These shifts are not only required for sustainable development or the understanding of the illusion of separation between humans and nature, it is also required for dealing with wicked policy problems, the VUCA world. And by VUCA we mean volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, which is one way that the world is now being described. So we can have a really powerful synergy from the convergence of science and spirituality to support the transition that we need to be making in public policy to deal with wicked policies, wicked public policies of the VUCA world. Now, how do we get there? How practically do we get there? What kinds of strategies we might use to move from where we are to where we need to be? And some of the strategies I will discuss now will include an approach that we are calling integral public policy, built upon the Ken Wilber's integral meta theory. We will also have to radically transform the relevant social science curricula, including policy and leadership courses that we currently teach in senior high school and in universities, both at undergraduate and postgraduate levels. We will need to be scaling, to be doing scaling of values, and we can draw from fractals which come from complexity theory to move from a wider to a deeper scaling. You see, mostly when we talk of scaling up, We are talking of increasing geographic reach. It's moving, if you like, wider horizontally. We are also having, we will also have to move to scaling deeper, and that is the scaling of values. And one way to do that is to get heuristic but deeper insights as well from fractals. And these are self-replicating memes, if you like, that occur in nature but can be used in society as well. We can also draw from the power of stories to transform the dominant policy narrative. Most of us are born, we inherit a certain narrative, we go to university, our professors are influenced by the same dominant policy narrative. We have to now begin to articulate a new policy narrative in order to achieve the shifts we are making. And what you need to teach in a public policy school is narrative policy. Now, the area of narrative policy is quite well developed and can be taught as a course, as a full course in a public policy school. I will argue that all public policy schools should now have at least one course in narrative policy, critically important. We can use complexity theory and complex adaptive systems in economics, and now we are moving away steadily, I believe, although many economists trained up to the last 10 years at least, they are all trained in neoclassical economics, and therefore we make these naive assumptions of reality to help with the mathematics, naive assumptions such as we have full information to be able to solve all problems, or we are fully rational, or our sole purpose in life is to maximize our own self-interest, and so on. These simplifications that we have made in economic theory, now we can go beyond those and begin to address reality as it is. And so behavioral economics helps, complexity economics helps, and we can begin to move forward. We are also learning a lot about the nature of reality from increasing use of quantum physics, but that is in the physical world. But in the social science world, quantum-like frameworks are now being used. We are studying human cognition, human decision making, and we are now looking at the applications of quantum-like frameworks for public policy. Cognitive neuroscience on how and why evolution masked reality from us. You know, I used to ask myself, and I suspect you ask yourself as well, if we are all inherently spiritual beings having human experiences, why is it that so few of us recognize that? And the answer is not that we were born in any different way. It is just that we evolved, all of us evolved that way, and we are slowly waking up to this reality that has been masked by evolution. So in order for us to survive during evolution, the kind of reality we are now able to understand had to be masked. But we are no longer in the jungle, although we behave so often as though we were. We are now in a different kind of civilization, different kind of society, and we have the opportunity to move to that level. And there is excellent work. Donald Hoffman wrote the book called The Case Against Reality, published in 2018, or Ian McGilchrist in his book The Master and His Emissary, 2010 and 2019, and his most recent book, The Matter with Things, are excellent introductions to this kind of science and where we are. Now, we also need to understand more deeply the science of sustainability. We talk a lot about the economics of sustainability, which is sometimes largely environmental science. But when we look at the way the physical and economic worlds, if you like, are intertwined, we find that the entropy law of thermodynamics and the economic process are so inherently linked that they need to be taught together. And so we need to be studying ecological economics much more than environmental economics, which remains essentially a neoclassical economic approach to internalizing the environment as an externality. So the understanding of economic and ecological metabolism, which needs to be in sync for sustainable development to be a reality, that level of theoretical understanding or the science becomes really important. And then, of course, there is more and more work now studying complex adaptive systems, different scales, different states, understanding systems from the individual level to the household level, through organizations, communities, districts, states, countries, up to the planetary level. And so we teach and study social ecological systems as part of understanding the science of sustainability. And finally, we talk a lot about multidisciplinary approaches needed for sustainable development. Yes, they are required, but they are far from enough. Not even interdisciplinary studies are enough. We need to move more to transdisciplinary approaches. And what is the difference? Transdisciplinary approaches implies going beyond disciplinary methods, even when they are integrated, to bringing in non-academic thinking, people in communities, people living in poverty, people managing natural resources at the ground level. Their views, their knowledge systems need to be integrated into the traditional, more academic disciplinary approaches. That's when we begin to move to transdisciplinary approaches. How do we move to what we call integral public policy? This little heuristic that you're looking at, this little diagram, is taken from the Ken Wilber's work and what is called the Wilber integral meta theory. It's a very simple frame of thinking how we will integrate different aspects of what we have just discussed. So like you can see on the screen, he says, all right, we either think and work as individuals or in groups, right? And we either approach the world just for the external phenomena and study just the external phenomena, or we might also bring in our individual internal reality or the internal reality of our societies. So when you put individual and collective on the y-axis and internal and external on the x-axis, now we get 4 quadrants. So you get the individual interior and in the upper left, and the individual exterior on the upper right. Similarly, you get collective interior in the bottom left and collective exterior in the bottom right. So what are these boxes? The individual interior is your consciousness and related features. The individual exterior is your behavior, and that's where we have subjects like behavioral economics and so on. In the first box that I mentioned, to study the individual interior, that's where we have meditation, spiritual practices, consciousness studies, and so on. Now, in the collective interior, this is culture, right, which we study as using ethnography, anthropology, and so on. And the systems work that we've always been doing, the public policy work, takes place dominantly in the collective exterior, right? That's the 4 simple boxes. So now we have connected in academic work and more in practice, we have connected 3 of those boxes. Culture, anthropology, ethnography, etc., is being brought in more and more into systems work for public policy. Similarly, behavioral science, behavioral economics, and so on is being brought in more and more to public policy in the systems box. The one connection that needs to be strengthened much more is the box on consciousness, i.e., our inner reality, our inner spiritual growth and development, our inner consciousness. And that's the one that we need to bring. But we should not forget the others. And so this kind of integral approach, we are arguing, will make public policy that is much closer to what we hope to achieve under the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, we will require some leadership to get us there. We have already so far teased out and analyzed the public, well, first of all, what is it we mean by understanding both spirituality, our own inner reality, and then how do we apply that, and what are the public policy implications for sustainable development and more generally public policy. One of the ways that we have argued in which we can do this is using an integral public policy approach, which we have just explained. But it's not going to happen until we get the right leadership to take us there. And this leadership has to be in the public service, at the bureaucratic level, as well as at the political level, and it must also be at other levels, academic, research, community level, and so on. So what do we need in this, what we might call transpersonal leadership, going beyond ego-based leadership, where leaders lead for the, if you like, for the recognition, the acclaim that I am a great leader, rather than focusing on the role and the function and the need of leadership, which is to help in transforming the world. And you are merely a channel through which that transformation takes place. To get that kind of leadership, we will need a balance among rational intelligence, emotional intelligence, and spiritual intelligence. We will need all the performance enhancement we need for good leaders, but we will also need the coming together of spiritual enlightenment, awakening, and emotional strength to take us there. Our leadership courses, whether in the business school, the public policy school, or universities and courses dedicated to leadership, must begin to bring these together so that our new leaders will in fact reflect this balance, and they will be able to make the transformation that we are talking about. So let's talk a little bit about this leadership, and then we'll wrap it up. So spiritual leadership is closely allied to what in the leadership literature is called authentic leadership, which is another leadership style, or servant leadership, which is another leadership style. So spiritual leadership is associated with both of these, but more closely, if you like, with servant leadership. There are 4 underlying precepts of servant leadership, and these include service before self, listening as a means of affirmation and creating trust, and nourishing followers to become whole. All of these are based on the notions of connectedness. And recall that it was connectedness that we saw as the critically important issue, both that happens when one becomes more spiritual and enlightened. You recognize the illusion of the separation and the wholeness or the oneness. And it is again coming up as a notion in spiritual leadership. We said that, if you look at servant leaders, you learn a lot about what is required to be a spiritual leader. Servant leaders possess inner consciousness and a sense of mission, which gives meaning and purpose to their own lives and to those around us. This attribute is described as a transcendent spirituality. So the behaviors of the leader that manifest, through that comes an inner conviction that something or someone beyond the self and the material world exists. And that makes life complete and meaningful. That vacuous feeling that one gets from time to time when all you have is material possessions in the world, that is what this understanding leads you to. It just puts you in touch with your real self. It is not at all about getting to any other place. It is really about getting in touch with your true self. One definition of spiritual leadership that has been proposed by Louis Fry is that spiritual leadership involves the growth of spiritual well-being of the leader as well as the follower, through calling and membership to create vision and value congruence across individual, empowered teams, and organizational levels. What then might be the source of spiritual leadership? It comes from this inner life that draws from spiritual practice, which is the fundamental source of inspiration and insight. And it positively influences the development of hope and faith and the transcendent vision of service to key stakeholders. But most importantly is the value of altruistic love. In fact, spirituality, beauty, and love might mean the very same thing. They are the essential values that one will naturally evolve to or share or develop as one becomes more and more in tune with their own reality. Louis Fry also treats spiritual leadership as an observable phenomenon occurring when a person in a leadership position embodies spiritual values such as integrity, honesty, and humility, creating the self as an example of someone who can be trusted, relied upon, and admired. Now note, the spiritual leader is where these values are emanating from an inner development. It's not that you have learned them from the outside and you impose them on yourself and then you hope and think that you have suddenly become or have recognized your true nature. It must come from your own inner realization of your own true nature, and these values are then really natural. They are not something that you have to practice as such. So as leaders' internal moral values and spirituality deepens, they progress primarily from transactional leadership styles to transformational leadership. And as leaders move from low spirituality to high spirituality, they also move from transactional leadership to transformational leadership, and finally to transcendental leadership, which is the ultimate of spiritual. There is a continuum, if you like, that supports the claim from transformational leadership style to more transactional or more to transformational, from transactional, and then ultimately to transcendental. Some argue that transcendental leaders possess all of the same effectiveness as transformational leaders, as well as having a higher internal locus of control and a higher level of spirituality. The key thing in all of this is that there are existing modes of leadership that are close enough to spiritual leadership from which we can learn, and so that our leaders and our leadership courses can help to bring about this leadership revolution that I'm talking about in order for us to achieve the world ahead of us. Now, another thing that one might look at, and a lot of people turn to Eastern spirituality and are having increasing interest in Eastern spirituality. So these notions that we get from, if you like, Advaita Vedanta or Buddhism or Taoism and so on, these notions of non-duality, oneness, connectedness, sharing of a single cosmic consciousness, recognition of the attachment to the ego as a false attachment and as a really a figment of conditioning, social and psychological conditioning, and indeed our own imagination. These are all independent of religious belief. They are more secular in nature. Note that although we can draw from the mystical core of Christianity, of Islam, of Hinduism, of Buddhism, of Taoism, and so on, we don't have to use any of the dogma or the doctrine from any of the organized religions. We can go to the secular mystical core. And so what we are dealing with is not from the religion per se, but our own true nature, secular in nature, human. And that makes it therefore very feasible for us to work with government because of the separation of religion and public policy, of, if you like, the so-called separation of church and state. We need to be working in a secular mode, and core spirituality is indeed our own true nature and hence secular in nature, and allows us to do this kind of thinking. This kind of insight, this understanding, this secular understanding of our own true nature, which we are calling spiritual in nature, but one might just call it consciousness, they have a great potential to influence the kind of leadership we need to address the world's most challenging and interconnected problems, such as greed, overconsumption, climate change, species extinction, social and economic inequality, etc. Let me remind you of the quotation from the former administrator of the United Nations Development Program, Gus Pett, which I cited earlier, when he said that I used to think that the greatest environmental problems in the world had to do with climate change and species extinction and deforestation and resources over-exploitation, over-consumption, and so on. And then he said, I now realize that I was wrong. The greatest environmental problems, I now conclude, he says, are selfishness, greed, apathy. And these problems, we need not more science and more economics, but a cultural and spiritual revolution to solve them. What I've been trying to show you in this talk is that these are now practically feasible and possible in politics, in government, in public policy, and most importantly, in my view, in leadership. And that is required to be able to deal with these issues that we have been talking about. Now I come to, how do we make this change happen in the world? I have reflected on the leadership challenges where individuals of countries, of governments, of organizations, corporations, and public policy schools might take the leadership to help us to get there. But I do not think that the world will change only because of that level of leadership. I believe that geopolitically, we need now a country to take the leadership forward. A country that is well poised to lead, to build upon its own strengths, and to work with changing the world. If you look now at the demographic dividend of India, the technological progress that it has been making, its phenomenal success in changing G20 through the chair of G20, its emergence as the voice of the South, the respect it has in North-South relations. Yes, it has problems like caste and social inclusion and the need for green growth and all of that. But when you look at it, who else is better placed? Not North America, not even Europe or Scandinavia. So I believe that India, with its 3,000 years of spiritual wisdom, with all that it has in its demography, its economy, its technological strength, is best placed to lead this revolution. And therefore, I have a sense of optimism when I look at the way that India is now evolving, but it needs to be drawing heavily from its spiritual wisdom, which it is not doing as much as it should be doing at the moment. I hope you have enjoyed this talk. I hope you see the potential value, and you see that without this kind of revolution, we might not indeed achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, and we might be busy creating conditions on the planet which will not be suitable for future generations to live. Thank you very much.